since you have an interest in talking true and you are here watching these videos, then you must have had a shift of consciousness or an awakening, or whatever term you want to give to recognizing that you are more than your mind, your body, and your emotions. And here on Talking True, I really love to have conversations with people who've had some kind of awakening and recognition that who they are is much more vast and infinite than the physical form. And so today I have a very special guest with me. His name is David Bingham, and he's had a series of awakenings. And I've asked him to join me today so that we can have a conversation about what that looked like for him. So David, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm really glad to be here and to enjoy our conversation.
Thank you. So where would you like to start? Do you want to talk a little bit about, I know you've had a Kundalini Awakening. Do you want to kind of detail that?
Yeah, it was a biggie. Yeah, it was about 7 years ago in 2017. I was having some hypnotherapy, trying to remember some old issues that had come up, just in a very positive way. I ended up being deeply relaxed within that, and a massive energetic awakening happened within my body, starting what I know now as that is at the base chakra, a massive eruption of energy that took me completely by surprise because I had the illusion of myself as being in inverted commas a normal person. So I was encountering a massive energy for the first time, and it rose up through my body and took the form of some kind of fist or snake, and it punched at my heart. And the second punch, it broke through my heart. That energetic rising rose up then through my body, up through my neck and through my head, and seemed to form what I thought at the time was like a two-way torch coming in and out of my head at the time. I mean, I was lost for words, of course, in that experience. But later, I came to understand it as a Kundalini awakening because a friend had pointed out I might want to read a book on this. So it was like a post-event discovery that, oh my goodness, you've had something quite strong. Within that experience, I was also encouraged by hearing a voice within myself, which I would call my soul, or you could call the higher self, as a guide within that process, because there was 2 points at which I thought probably I may be going to die or something terrible was going to happen. So the one was where my heart was racing before it was broken through. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this will kill me, but I got some encouragement to go through with that. And then a bit later, during the phase when the Kundalini had risen through the head, after a period of being blasted into white space, I actually came to hear the same voice again, this time encouraging me to cope with what was going on. There was some kind of significant brainstem rewiring going on. And it was about 5 minutes. It felt very unnerving. It felt something like a science fiction thing that you would see in a movie, perhaps, or something like that. And it certainly felt like some kind of internal switches had been thrown inside me. Something was just reactivating or newly activating within my system. So I had the full, well, I know Kundalini varies a great deal, but you could say I had the full tamale. I had a strong sweep up through the body, but one that seemed to also, that I later realized, stabilized as well at the same time.
Had you ever heard of Kundalini prior to having the hypnotherapy session, or was this completely new?
No, I'd never read about it. I think I had heard the name Kundalini once or twice, perhaps in respect to the association with yoga or something like that. But I had no understanding whatsoever what Kundalini was. And I had therefore no internal intention of oh, this is Kundalini. I wish one day I could have a Kundalini awakening. That was not part of the equation at all.
No. And just as a matter of interest, the person that was working with you, the hypnotherapist, had he or she had a Kundalini awakening? They obviously knew about it, right?
Not at all, no. But very
Really?
interesting person. Yes, not at all. I've never had a client since who's had that. Of course, he's had lots of interesting clients with lots of different experiences, but uh, he was previously a shaman. He had an adventuring spirit. And also was a therapist and qualified therapist as well in the more modern day, and was able to help people, and was also interested in energetics within people and helping them with energetics. So yes, he had an interesting background for sure, and he's still
Well,
around practicing.
yeah, and isn't it wonderful that he was able to rightly see and
Yeah,
tell you what was going
yeah.
on and
Well,
describe it?
yes, exactly. Well, yes. I mean, I was actually talking to him a bit during it, trying to reassure him because I was sort of my arms were out like this, and I was thrashing around, and it was like I was being blown up on a space rocket, really, going up into the atmosphere. So I tried to say, well, I feel all right in this. I'm going to stay with it. And the more American term, holding space for somebody. Well, he did hold space for me. He was there, and I felt like it was almost like whatever would happen, he would try to help me, bring me back if that was necessary. Uh,
That's
but I mean, I got much more than I bargained for, and to some extent, so did he. At a subsequent session, I was shaking so much in the chair actually fell over backwards.
oh
And,
wow.
so so it was interesting. I call him my birther now. He helped bring me into the world a little bit, so that's quite sweet.
I'm sure it helped him because oftentimes when there's a massive awakening like that, then it impacts the person who's holding the space, you know?
Oh yeah,
So I
yes.
wouldn't be surprised if he's had his own form of awakening, which can be quite subtle. It might not even be that he's noticed it per se, but um, it's
Yeah,
it's fascinating. So following on from
two-way
that,
street.
yeah. So following on from that, though, how were you able to interact, or did you go through deeper processes and more awakenings, or what was the story?
Well, most of the time I was wondering what on earth had happened, especially for the first few weeks, wandering around, just being in a blissful daze, really. Uh, and I noticed that elements of my consciousness had changed. It was hard to always observe these things, but I didn't force it. But I noticed at certain points there had been so significant ground shifts in the nature of my being and who I thought I was. Uh, for example, my relationship to love changed. I no longer saw it as something that somehow I possessed or that other people possess between themselves, between other people. I saw it more as being something that you can't own and that is a beautiful fluid thing that exists and guides the world. I saw that. And so the idea of being the ego possession of love shifted. And I noticed the big one that is often behind the scenes for a lot of us, well, for all of us really, this sort of ego fear of death disappeared. I was no longer afraid of death whatsoever. Uh, so it's almost like I was noticing what I didn't have rather than what I did have or what had gone missing.
Yeah,
Uh, and I also noticed that, I'm a bit of a sensitive guy and, I like company and don't want to be on my own too long. At least I did beforehand. But I noticed afterwards it didn't matter one blind bit whether I was on my own for hours on end or was in company of other people. I was stabilized, whichever nature of the experience occurred.
yeah.
So it was a shift in consciousness for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was held there as well. I was held in a kind of distanced from perhaps elements of my own mind self that would be perhaps destructive to the clearing and the further processes that were going on. I regard it now that I was actually, to some extent, not trusted. So, in the sense that I had an operational mind that would be quite judgmental and would push myself certain ways. Well, this was all held at quite a distance. And it was like I kind of placed in a more Buddhic or witness type consciousness.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
a little bit of distance, you were protected from that sphere of the self that might, not necessarily run well with what was happening for you.
And then did you find, because certainly speaking from experience, there were physiological changes as well, with respect to obviously my energy, your energy kind of ramps up significantly. And then there was desires to eat certain foods just absolutely fell away. So I was really turned off. I wasn't a big meat eater, but in the beginning, but I just couldn't eat meat going, after Shaktipat. It just revulsed me. And then also being around certain people, I just knew energetically, I just couldn't. And it wasn't a conscious thing, it just started to kind of have its own life and shape. And there was this sort of a proclivity to just do certain things that, again, it weren't conscious, but they just started to happen. So certain friends fell away. I stopped drinking alcohol, stopped eating meat, I stopped hanging out with certain groups. That became really, really clear. So was it like that for you?
Not as quite as purified as that, because my habits still are a bit mixed. But I wasn't put off meat, although my feeling when you consume an animal now, when you actually eat the flesh of an animal, is because the Kundalini is a great sensitivity. It's almost like you get a feeling for where that animal came from and the quality of its life. When no, not always, but sometimes I have that sensitivity. So, if that animal's had a poor life, then you're taking that into yourself. You know.
Yeah.
So not a great thing, perhaps.
Yeah. Did you find the awakening of the siddhis, the supernatural powers, began to manifest for you? Because again, that was certainly the
Yes.
case. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, certain things came with it. I mean, one of the things that I noticed that came with it was that I could observe, not all the time, but fairly regularly, the deep inner kind of archetype of people that lay behind the front. I could see into their souls, or perhaps even some kind of deeper archetype within the person, and sometimes not always human as well. So this was a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them seem to be from ancient mythologies and old ways of seeing things, and more magical tales, shall we say? So I saw that element within people. So I thought, well, this is more unusual. Has some occult element to it as well. And while perhaps having that gift, and I still have it now, I at the time, and I still do. I see it as relatively peripheral. It's a good indicator that something's happened to you. I'm not dismissing it, but at the same time, there's something more going on that's a little more, perhaps hopefully a bit more important than just the gift of being able to see things. I mean, my own view is that a lot of people, who are extremely gifted, can be born, into a gifted scheme of things. They are able to see things, especially in their early years and into adulthood. And they're mediums, they're psychics, they have various abilities. I don't doubt that. But at the same time, to make that your play and your trade, it means not. It might help other people, but it doesn't really necessarily aid your development, I think, necessarily. I'm not trying to
Yes.
judge that too much.
Yeah. I mean,
think,
I'm with you. Actually, yeah.
I mean, the journey is an internal evolution, so far as I can see. An invite, a great invite. The door's been kicked in. You've got a chance to do something, but then you've still got to meet that challenge, and you've got to do something, rather than sit back and sit on your laurels and say, "Well, I can do this and I can do that." I'm a healer, and it's this is just the swapping of old identities for new identities, really. But
Yes.
actually, we're all much more than that, of course. We're much richer than that. So that
Yes.
would be
Yes.
my.
I will often work with people just because, I have to meet them where they are. And so that might mean there's discussions about, creating space and pointing to, or kind of guiding them to the sort of the psychological obstacles that stand in the way of their own clear seeing and all of that. So we get into the story, but and I think that can be helpful. But the real work is realizing and seeing that you are prior to the story, and this sort of bigger vision then opens up. But oftentimes there has to be work done around the story, and understanding, patterns and conditioning.
I'm with you 100%. I mean, and also soul to soul. If someone is actually reaching out to you on a deeper level, then of course you're responding in kind to them.
Yes.
So that's beautiful. Uh,
Yes.
I mean, I remember in the first 6 months or so after my awakening, I started to get the big idea I had powers and stuff. So I do apologize, but I started to have that focus a little bit, or at least the ego did. And there was a very nice lady who was a friend who ran a gallery in the city where I lived, and she had Parkinson's disease, unfortunately, or a form of Parkinson's disease, and it was taking her away gradually. And she's very strong-willed and determined, and I was full of Kundalini beans. And I remember saying to her, I said, "Well, would you like to hold hands and perhaps, we'll see if there can be some benefit or some good energy might emerge for you, some healing, perhaps. I don't know, but I offered, but she didn't offer to me, but I offered to her." And she grabbed both my hands, one of my hands with both of her hands like that. And she was quite keen to have it. And I could feel the sort of golden energy going from me into her arm, which was great. It seemed positive. And then it came to a bit of a gradual standstill. And that which was within her woke up and looked out at me. And it wasn't altogether present. It was, I mean, you know these things from inner recognition, but it was some kind of very ancient, very old, deep vampiric energy that fed off people and had been around for donkey's years and was very powerful and very intelligent. And it was looking through her left eye at me. And it wasn't her, it was something else. So again, it was a little bit like a horror film. It was a blood red eye looking out at me, with a very strong intelligence. And I could see that it was slightly eyeing me up for dinner, looking for weaknesses on a subtle plane, this entity. And it eventually started pushing back on my golden energy. I could feel that sort of this kind of ancient, dark, black energy was coming down through her body and coming back down her arm, pushing my energy out of the way. And eventually it wanted to get into my hand. So at which point I decided to let go. And I stayed with it. I eyeballed it for a couple of minutes. And so, I had been in there a little bit trying to see what was going on, but I wasn't prepared for the shock of what happened. I wasn't prepared for what I discovered. I wasn't prepared for the immense energetic power of that which was looking down on me. And I could see I was being taught an interesting lesson, and I remember saying to her afterwards, how was it for you? And she popped out of that character again. And she just immediately, when the hand was let go off, she came back to herself again. And she said, "Oh, that was wonderful. Oh, that was really nice." And I thought, well, I can't, don't make it even worse. I can't harm this. And I was just grateful that she seemed okay. She'd come back again. But it was for me to witness what was going on there, not for her.
Yes.
And I visited her in hospital later when she was less able, because I thought, well, I'm not running away from this, but I'm not necessarily going to provoke it again. And I just asked her, I remember asking her, I said, well, do you dream much at night? Do you remember your dreams? And she said, funnily enough, since I had this illness, I can't remember any dreams whatsoever. And again, that's a little indicator for me, a little clue that perhaps when she goes unconscious at night, whatever is subtle realm being is within her becomes more active and dominates the scene. It was quite a hard learning experience for me, but hopefully I learned about my arrogance, my sort of youthful arrogance, wanting to sort of help without necessarily knowing what was around the corner, and getting a bit of a scare in that as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's kind of the universal law of healing, I guess, or awakening, if you can call it that, right? That we have to ask for permission. Permission has to be given before we.
If you don't ask, watch out what you get.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've had. I mean, I do detail some of these things in my first book, but I'm a lucid dreamer. I've been a lucid dreamer since I was, I don't know, came out the womb. And especially after the Kundalini Awakening back in 1989, I would have these really profound lucid dreams with great beings who would come and give initiation, and, we'd have discussions and things like that. But I also had kind of dark entities that would try to come into my space. I'd wake up and recognize this is a dream and I'm dreaming. And I'd be in my bedroom, and then I'd see these dark forms coming into the room, or I would feel a presence. And I just got used to saying the same thing, which was, if you are of God, you are welcome. If not, leave now. And sometimes I used to really have to be very forceful to get that dark energy to leave. And sometimes I'd be kind of in battle with it. Yeah. And I would have to invoke the great beings and say prayers, the Lord's Prayer, or repeat the mantras or whatever it was to get this energy out. And again, I remember a few times I did work, I went through a phase where I was crazy about doing these workshops, crystal healing workshops and chakra, whatever it was, clearing workshops, in the kind of initial, I guess, honeymoon phase of the awakening, trying to figure everything out. But a few times.
The interested mind, isn't it? It's the interested mind trying to take you forward.
Yes, it's the mind. What I realize now, of course, is it was the mind trying to make sense of it all. And of course, the mind can never make sense of any of it. But I did go through a phase where I thought maybe some of these courses or trainings would help, and it really didn't. But a few times, I would do these workshops to a half day or a day or something like that, and then I would start to not feel well, and then I would realize later that I picked up these kind of dark masses of energy that would attach to areas of the body where there was a bit of weakness, like in my lower back or something like that. And so I just learned
workshops. Sorry, these were workshops with other people or online workshops?
Yeah, other people who would be leading. Like I did a crystal healing workshop with a couple that came from the UK, from Glastonbury, I think they were from. But anyway, they came to the Bahamas to do it. And anyway, I wasn't feeling well afterwards. And then I had this lucid dream where I saw this massive dark energy that had attached to my back. And then I repeated mantras and eventually sort of, pulled it off and sent it off into the light. But and since then I've been really super sensitive to those things. And of course I don't have any interest in doing anything like that anymore. But it did make me realize that you can go to these events thinking that you're going to heal something or have a breakthrough, and in fact you end up coming away from them more burdened.
Yeah.
And,
You got more than you bargained for, yes.
yeah, yeah. So you
Yeah.
really do have to be very careful. And, you know, master yogis have said that since forever, especially after you've had an awakening. You have to be very careful about what you consume with respect to the food you eat and the drinks, and, you know, what you're watching on television, what you're reading,
What
who
you
you're
allow
spending
through you,
time
yes.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because
I
you
understand that. I'd say the majority of people probably would agree with you and take that viewpoint. I mean, for myself, the issue was in terms of interest of other entities and other beings, or not necessarily with good intentions or not. Uh, the issue within my experience mostly wasn't in vivid dreaming, lucid dreaming. It came through third eye vision after waking up in the morning, usually. And then I would see what was going on. And that was a great challenge to the psyche. And it's not surprising, really. I mean, I feel as though I'm sort of like my opening was quite broadband, if you would like to say. There's quite a good channel that was opened for me. But at the same time, I haven't had a background, a sophisticated background of gentle, dedicated spiritual work and prayer and meditation. I haven't built up a meditative focus through that kind of discipline. I haven't sort of studied the self in that way. So it's natural that there's a lot of clearing and a lot of stuff that would need to go on in the wake of such an opening. Because I
Mhm.
feel, in my view, you're being invited to see uh, your Freudian id. It's basically the deep dark well of who you are and all the complications that you never get to access. Suddenly that's opened up in varying degrees to you as much as you can cope with. And
Yes.
I do feel it's a guided and managed process as well. The higher self or soul, which I would say, basically manages you. It's putting you through this. It's putting you through a boot camp.
Yes.
And it's a tough boot camp as well. And it looks like I needed quite a tough boot camp as well, which is good. But then at the same time, I suppose the reverse compliment is true. And I mean, I was sort of strong enough to take the tough stuff, the difficult stuff. So I think
Yeah.
that's a compliment in a way. I was thrown in with things that were, a lot of people would run away from. So in a way, it's like saying, well, okay, you can take this, David, but here you go. Here's your limit. Let's see how you run with this.
Yeah.
I guess I've had quite a bit of processing over the 7 years. I'm sure there's plenty still to go. I do feel as though my orientation has shifted and elements of things that are not just subtle consciousness now, but a more cosmic consciousness have touched me. I, I now somehow integrated elements of that within my beings. So what I am has shifted over these 7 years, and how
Yes.
I see things. So of course that will change again, I'm sure, but the orientation to that and the expansiveness to that has shifted and changed.
Yeah, and it's like you said before, it's oftentimes not until later that you see what has left, because it's not conscious at all, is it? You know, so
Yes.
you suddenly realize,
Yeah.
oh, that's gone and that's gone and this has fallen
Yes,
away.
I agree with you. Yes, yes.
That
It's I'm a bit like the dinosaur's tail. You hit it, and the head realizes about 3 minutes later. You know.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
this.
it's
Yeah,
which
it
is a
takes a
good
while.
thing. Which is a
Yeah.
great thing. And also
Mhm.
one of the big aspects of it for me too was walking a tightrope with respect to when to speak up about things, you know, the mysteries, let's call it that, and when to keep quiet. Because I'd find
To
that,
place your
yeah, but what I'd find is that I would, for example, meet someone for the first time, I'd shake his hand or her hand, I'd get a flood of information about him or her. And, you know, so then trying to figure out, okay, is this to be shared? Do I say anything? Do I not say anything? Is it appropriate?
Yes.
You know, and that can be kind of tricky because, you know, that phrase from the Bible, don't throw pearls before swine, or however it goes. You know, it can get really tricky. And then there are certainly have been times in my life where I've had this flood of information and then I haven't said anything. And then I've realized that that person was actually very open and they were looking for some kind of guidance or message from the universe, and I hadn't responded in a way that could have been very helpful. So again, and the mind, you know, the mind, the egoic mind really has to get out of the way and surrender, because when
you're on the ball.
Because when there's that,
it's really true.
Yeah, because when there's a complete surrender, there's this absolute complete knowing when is the right time and when is not the right time. And the thing is that the Supreme Self isn't looking for any sort of aggrandizement or accolades or anything. It's just purely, it's the self serving itself and sharing. And
beautifully put.
Yeah, so there's no weight to it. You just share and then, you know, move on.
Well, I think you've answered the question of that anyway. For me, you've helped me to explain what I wanted to say anyway, which is that basically, I think when you gravitate more to your larger self, your greater self, your soul self, when your mind settles more in harmony with the deeper being that you truly are, when there's a settling, when there's a yoking even, you know, where you're in deeper natural harmony with that which you truly are, then it actually doesn't matter any scenario that arises, because it's all well handled, because you're in harmony with what you are.
Yes.
It's only when we're slightly guided by the ego self that we wonder, oh, well, should I have done this with this person or should I have not? But those questions are less arising, or maybe not even arising, when that deep harmonics occurs, of being just who you are completely.
Yes.
And then that in turn just resonates, and it's like exactly like you said, that resonates in its own way, because whoever you're going to be in contact with, it's going to be spontaneous, and the reaction is going to be appropriate to the time and the person, and something that you recognize within that. And my own feeling, my own perspective, is that when you're in that kind of guided sense, that deeper rooted sense, no one is ever harmed by that, ever. There's never any bad outcome from that, because it's coming from the right place, even if the words might sound a bit garbled to the person. You could even say something rather stupid to the person, but they would still take it the right way because it's coming from the source. You know,
yes,
that would be my view.
Yes, it's source itself, speaking to source itself, because the source within that person, or that person as source, you know, will recognize the resonance. You know, whenever we hear truth, we resonate with it, even if it does sound a bit weird. And
I get it. So what you mean then? It's almost like you're talking directly soul to soul.
Yes.
So even if there's very different personalities involved and various filters going on, you're reaching a bit beyond that, and you're reaching their true self as well. And somehow, even if they're not necessarily recognizing it, it's still going in.
Yes. Because language can be such a barrier. And the thing is I discovered that some years, you know, actually soon after the awakening, I was working in a government school in very tough conditions, actually, but in a government school, which was in the Bahamas. The schools are primarily Christian. And, you know, there might be Baptist, or there might be Seventh-day Adventist schools or whatever, but, you know, sort of Catholic. And of course, when I was given information about a person, either a student or another teacher or a parent or whoever it was, you know, I couldn't speak about energy and chakras and Kundalini and all of those things. You know, they would have been horrified. But and again, if it was the right time, if it wasn't, then I would never say anything. But I realized that just using the language that was like a doorway or a meeting place, there was no problem. So if I said, Jesus told me to tell you, or, um, spirit is saying this, or spirit is saying that, then it was perfectly okay. It wasn't a problem. And there was a complete meeting and an understanding. And there was a receiving, there was a transmission that would take place. And obviously I wasn't sort of pushing that on students, because it's just, you just don't do it. But whenever I had teachers that would, want to ask questions, or they were burdened by something, or whatever the story was, then sometimes I'd receive information. But just using that kind of language was a meeting point. It was so beautiful. And it happened again and again. And
sounds like you found your way, yes, with this task. And I imagine that a lot of the students occasionally would come to you afterwards, not necessarily always knowing exactly why. They would seek you out because they recognize something in you.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
that
mean,
kind of
yeah.
inner guidance. Yeah.
Yes. Well, let me just share a couple of anecdotes, because again, I think it's helpful for viewers, because I think one of the things that happens with people at post-awakening is that sometimes there's this feeling that you want to proselytize, because it's just so incredible. You want to tell everybody, but it can be really tricky. So, but the thing is that it's your state that does the work. Even if you're not speaking, even if you're not saying anything, the awakening, the awakened state speaks for itself. So it somehow sends out this energy.
Radiates out.
It radiates out. It's like a laser beams, and it finds people. And Paramahansa Yogananda spoke about this, because he said that his guru, Sri Yukteswar, I think was his name.
That's right.
He used to send out these laser beams of light that would go looking for people that were looking for looking to be awakened. And this laser beam of light would find them, and then they would somehow come to him. So really your state does do the work. But when you think about the context with respect to the school I was working at, which there was 1,800 students, it was a government school, not many facilities. The facilities were quite poor. We were essentially dealing with students from the local environment, which was primarily one-parent homes, not much money there. Students were fairly poor, raised in the Christian tradition, with absolutely no interest or understanding of anything to do with yoga. And again, this was in the 80s. But what would happen is students would gravitate towards the art room, and they would say things like, "Can I come in and sit here a while, because my spirit feels happy in this room?" Or they'd come to me and they would pranam like this. And again, that was so outside of their understanding. And then one time a boy was cleaning a board for me. I was taking an art display down. He was cleaning it. He had a wet rag and he was going, "Om, om." He did that 3 times, and then he suddenly stopped and looked surprised, and then looked at me and looked down at the board, and then just was quiet. But I realized there was a transmission that was, and I was in the room constantly repeating the mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. Om is the primordial sound, Namah means I bow to, and Shiva is consciousness of the Supreme Self. So that was...
You were saying that out loud while he was doing the work?
No, yes. I was repeating that silently throughout the day.
So constantly. He picked it right up. Wow.
Yeah. Constantly, really intensely. And then I'd have lucid dreams where I was, in the room and doing this work. So, all of these things... I
think I'd like to have been a student in your class, I think. That would have been nice. If I was a bit younger.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because what's been amazing is, all these years later, and I've worked in several schools, but I've come across students that I used to teach who've gone on to, they're doing intuitive paintings, and they're, one of them was doing tarot card readings, and somebody else is doing something. And one of them did say to me that she knew that she had an awakening, even though I wasn't speaking about that. She had an awakening when she started taking my art lessons. And I could see it in her work. She was painting peacock feathers and signs, and even though I wasn't speaking about that at all, so it was it just gave me this insight into how profound the awakening power is, and how it's, you know, it's completely and supremely intelligent, and it works through each one of us, and it knows where to go to awaken other people. And we don't often we don't have a clue, and it's probably a good thing we don't, because the ego would probably want to take charge of it. And it's just really, yeah, it's really incredible. And you know, the same's held true with the books. I've written a few books, and I'll often get messages about, you know, somebody read it and they were crying for 3 hours and something's happened to them, and all of those things. And again, the ego cannot take credit for any of it, because it's this power that has been awakened within us that then does what it has to do to connect with those people who are longing to awaken to the truth of who they are. So, and I know
yes, when you gave that example of Yogananda as well, it's very interesting to me, that because he features in for me as well. But I was also thinking of Ramana Maharshi and stories around him, especially his early years after he was, inverted commas, discovered, and then they built an ashram around him. He was someone who wasn't speaking, just emanating. Many years, he wasn't someone who was giving teachings and guidings. He wasn't someone involved in the ins and outs of how to conquer your mind and how to discover the supreme being within yourself. He wasn't doing this kind of teaching thing at all. He was being, and the pure strength of his being had such a radiant force that it apparently, you know, it had a very profound effect, and people just gathered just to feel that, and they were reached by that. You know, so it really backs up what you're saying. If you sort of talked about, you know, what you just described, and you added perhaps a few factors to that, then that's the same effect.
Yes.
It's the same thing. And he was just immersed in that. And I know later on he came to advocate, you know, as a slightly older man, there was some method for people to follow, and he called it self-inquiry and things like that. So, you know, it's curious because, you know, he actually operated just by being. And then later he helped people. Well, there must be some mapping, at least. You can have a little bit of effort rather than just sitting here next to me. You've got to go and find a way into this if you can. And that's where, you know, to some extent, a meditative, mind-led self-inquiry can be useful, I think.
The way it was described to me is that it was, you know, masters will give seekers these things to do. It keeps the mind busy. It makes people feel like they're doing something, but really what's really happening is this transmission. You know, every time a seeker thinks of the guru, an authentic guru like Ramana Maharshi or Yogananda or whoever, you're connecting in with it's source, remembering source, or source being with source. And there's a transmission in that. And through that, and again, it's heart-centered, it's through love. It's this deep longing to be in the company of a great being, and that's really where the work is. And these self-inquiry practices are kind of, I guess, tools to get into that space or place.
Yeah, I mean, my own orientation to that, and it's just a particular viewpoint, is I kind of go with a little bit more of what Yogananda said. Because he sort of said, well, the mind is on various different levels. If you view it on a sort of on a line, you know, you're pretty primal at one end, and very basic at one end, and very animalistic at one end. And then, you know, there's a lot of the middle ground that's occupied by some good things and some problematic things. And then there's also some elements of higher mind that operate, that can be quite closer to the understanding of the soul. So basically, there is something to be charmed within your idea of yourself that can be fostered within the higher sense of self that gets closer to the soul being. And attuning one's normal imaginary mind self to that deeper true self that encompasses everything is a wonderful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of gentle mindfulness, this kind of inquiry, this kind of regard for just having a look at what's going on rather than just surrendering.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of wonderful things in bhakti devotion and giving up yourself. But I'm sort of more partly in the school of people who think, well, the mind part of God's creation. So let's bring the mind into this equation a little bit more. And the tendency, especially in the West, I've noticed quite a lot with a lot of people who have had profound awakenings, often non-dual awakenings, is they say, well, the mind is done. I'm not buying into that anymore. It's no longer part of the journey. Or even in worst cases, I'm even free of the mind. This delusion. And I think, well, why not work the harder way, the harder route, and bring the mind into this gently charmed and trained relationship with the greater self. Bring it to heal. Train it a little bit like a dog if you can. Bring it into the role where it actually truly belongs, and it won't fight you anymore. It won't create necessarily problems for you. It'll actually be in deep harmony with the realization that it's not going to be dissolved. It's part of the greater self. And then you have a functional mind that's more integrated in your greater self. And your life as a human being can continue without you just sitting on a hilltop and thinking, well, I can't do anything more and that's it. And the race is run. I'm cooked. My goose is cooked. There's nothing else to do here. Well, with an active mind integrated in the greater self, there's plenty to do. There's a great journey to be explored. And then you're more embodied in all aspects of yourself.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly done a lot of self-inquiry, which has been very useful. And I think it's really helpful with specifically with respect to the shadow aspects of the psyche and understanding conditioning and patterns and other things that can trip us up, because you can have, and I know you've seen this too, but you can have a really radical, amazing, mind-blowing, life-changing awakening, and then have, and you see this sometimes in spiritual teachers where that's happened, but the work on the psyche hasn't been done, which is, and not the best not the best place to be
good
teaching.
To point to that. Yes, it's very useful to point to that because, whilst considering yourself perhaps on a special level in terms of one's spiritual development, it seems that the elements of the psyche are still extremely operational. In fact, if anything, more dangerous because they're slightly hidden from the observer.
Yes.
And of course, if you have had strong awakenings and you are in quite a powerful position in terms of your own development, well, those illusions are magnified even more because they have power to them. And also the power that people devotionally, perhaps towards a guru, might give to that guru, that they put them on a platform. And that again is not necessarily their choice, but nevertheless, it all reinforces this illusion about who I am and why I'm different, perhaps, from the people that are gathered around me, when you're not any different. Just a soul with another group of blessed souls. And we're all just recognizing each other if we can.
Yes. Well said. That just about sums that up, I think. But all of this works. It's important. But the other part of that too is not continually, being obsessed with doing the work, like inner child work. I've shared with a few people before who have been doing shadow work or inner child work for 20, 30, 40 years, and I think there'll be a tendency to keep dropping anchor there rather than doing whatever's needed to be done, and then choosing to stay in a place or state or whatever you want to call it that is prior to those stories and that kind of conditioning.
I agree with you. There's especially in the West, because it doesn't seem to happen much in the East. There's a lot of fusion between the ideas of psychology and therapeutic recovery or trauma, and also the ideas of spirituality. And it seems a lot of people work quite hard to fuse the two together, but the two they're not necessarily great bedfellows. They don't necessarily so easily belong together, and yet we tend to fuse them. I mean, the famous thing about New York psychiatrists is they're never out of a job because there's always more to dig out of the well,
Yes.
and people go to them for years. I think you can, the mind is so capable that it's quite capable of keeping on digging holes. I mean, I'm not discounting the value and reality of what is discovered, but at the same time, it's such a generative entity. You can find whatever you want to keep on finding, and you can keep on digging that hole deeper and deeper, and it's an endless hole. So in terms of the resolution of the nature of self through psychotherapeutic methods, I would lean more towards the spiritual and say, well, this isn't just something for the mind to work out or an experienced, well-paid person with a PhD to help you with. There's an inner journey that you need to make, and there's difficult discoveries to be made. But at the same time, it's not about just continually being under that kind of mental surgical knife, where you have to find a way of being at peace with yourself. And I think this is very hard for a lot of us, and it was hard for me too. If you don't mind me saying so, there was one instance in a morning when I woke up when I actually got a little bit of an insight into that, and it was about 5 years ago. And I woke up and I felt great. It was one of those days when you wake up and you feel, I'm on top of the world. It's wonderful. It's one of those good, energetic, balanced energy feelings and open to things. And I lay in bed because I'm a bit lazy. I just watched my thoughts and ponderings and moods as they developed. And I did some observation of it, and I watched, and just gradually it shifted to a dissatisfaction with something. And I noticed, I said, what's going on there? And that dissatisfaction was something years ago where something hadn't gone right with someone, or we hadn't quite explained ourselves very well. And it left me with a feeling that perhaps I should have done better or something like that. And I thought, I woke up this morning feeling quite good. And I've now visited something that's been thrown up at me. On what grounds has that come? On what basis am I being put through the emotional feeling of the experience again? Is it because of attachments? Or is it possibly because there's something generating within me that will create change within me and almost make me lose that feeling of what I had in the first instance and put me into a more unsettled state where I'm reminded of something that's different. I came to the conclusion that there wasn't much solid basis for the shift in the mind orientation, and that I was watching the mechanism of the mind as a process where it leaves the host unsettled, and that basically, if you watch them quietly enough and long enough, you'll see these unsettling motions come, or these changes, or these shifts of gears, if you want to call it that. And so basically you can observe yourself, and the source of that is not necessarily, well, it might be drawn from experience and it convinces you that it is experience, but actually it could be anything. And it seems like there was a kind of like a mental program running, that the human beings genetically, we're developed in a way that our minds operate so that they don't become too settled, and that they keep changing their moods and their orientation, and that your feeling for perhaps who you are doesn't necessarily remain steady. It becomes a bit of a moving feast. And I came to the conclusion that this actually was just like a programming, really. It's like a program running it, an unsophisticated but deep level program that keeps you a bit unsettled, because maybe with Stone Age man, it was probably quite useful if you if you were sitting around the campfire and you were too blissed out, you'd be soon be eaten by a saber tooth. So, so actually, becoming unsteady or shifting or mood shifting or whatever, or orientation shifting, is a construct developed within ourselves that operates of its own accord. It's actually counter to the development of a deeply focused mind that is more in tune with the deeper self. So that was my insight from that morning awareness thing.
Yes, which, what you've articulated just now is really a great story, shining light on the value of self-inquiry. This is the really good part about what, the fruit of what self-inquiry can gift you with when you start paying attention. And then over time, you begin to see that, oh, wait a minute, there's a place from which, this movement and this activity is being seen, that doesn't come and go. It doesn't change. It's not subject to any good feeling or any negative mood. This place is absolutely 100% stable. And this place from which, this movement is seen is the truth of who you are. And then you become aware of awareness. And then it's a game changer.
Yes, because it is a game changer, isn't it? Yes, yes.
Yeah, because one of the I have to say, one of the things that was just this like real massive light bulb was especially soon after having Shaktipat, and I'd have these amazing experiences. I'd feel incredible, and I'd have lucid dreams, and I'd be filled with light. There was all this psychic phenomenon, and it's really incredible. And that lasted for years and years and years. But then there'd be periods where I would just just crash.
Yeah.
And then
I understand that as well, although I don't quite identify with it, because my particular thing was where I went into a stabilized state. And also then soon after, within 2 years, fell into a deep samadhi that has just continued to the present day.
Yes.
So the more normal reaction when you have such a wonderful high is to have the fall as well.
Yes.
I get you.
Yeah, but anyway,
then what the mind does about that is that it builds regrets, doesn't it? Oh, I wish I could get back to that feeling that I had before.
Yes, yes.
It's all like the internal story starts to be constructed around that.
Yes, so it perpetuates this idea that you need to keep seeking, or maybe you need to double up your efforts with respect to meditation, or you need to chant more, or whatever the story is, do more retreats or whatever. So I'd have these highs for long periods of time, and it wasn't even like I'd feel really depressed or upset. I just feel a bit like blah, or like and there was this belief, and I think it's a common belief, that unless you're in this constant state of bliss and feeling amazing, you've lost it. And then but what the shift for me was this clear seeing that the place from which these highs were seen, and the place from which these kind of bottoming out or kind of flat periods were happening, never changed. And there can be so that has always, I recognize that has always, this capacity to see from this place that is constant has always been the case. It was there since I was a kid. I was always trying to get, we had a big family, and I was always trying to find a quiet place just to kind of be in that space, so to speak, and not get pulled into the craziness. But I recognize, this has always been here, and this never comes and goes. It doesn't change. It's not affected by anything in any way, shape, or form. And this is a true self. This is who I am. But somehow I needed to, go through the whole seeking game.
No, it's. I mean, your seeking game, but it's also based on a different life experience, because the giftedness that you have as a child the openness that you had, you're able to talk with God, and that itself, well, of course, would be a challenge in some ways to a young child's psyche. But all that giftedness, all that openness, well, elements of that, the adult journey is the mind coming to terms and returning to some element of that original self, that opening, that awareness that you had. I can't say that I had that great connectedness as a child. I mean, obviously, I had some quite unusual experiences as a child, but they were quite unusual phenomena. But at the same time, I had no kind of basic wisdom about what my nature was, and I just thought of myself basically as a normal Joe just going about my business. And if something strange happened, and this is again is a facet of the mind, if something strange happened, my mind eventually either put it on a shelf and forgot about it, or actually even dismissed it and said, well, that didn't happen really, or made up some kind of story. Or even if you can't make any sense of something, it just no longer registers. It's just sort of blocked in a way. So I think the human capacity for judgment making is fascinating because it seems like we're in a managed process all the time. And also part of the illusion of the self, especially an educated liberal self that feels, oh yes, I can weigh things up and I can judge arguments, I can understand things, I can know where I am, and I'm the one responsible for that. It's all good, but it's so deeply based in illusion, it's just not true. Because the mind is constantly filtering things that it can accept or not accept, it seems to me. For example, when you come across something very new that's maybe strange or esoteric or doesn't seem to belong to your realm, well, what you do to that experience is, well, encountering experience is one thing, that's normal. It's a human experience. But what then the mind does to it, it does all sorts of things to the actual experience afterwards. It takes it through a mangling process. And it seems like we have some kind of matrix of what we can accept and what we can't accept. That which belongs to us and that which doesn't, or is unfamiliar to us. So when something is partly recognizable, it seems like what we do is we sort of find the things in ourselves that we recognize in that thing that's partly recognizable, and we identify with that, and we say, well, this must be this, and we give it a label, and then we put it in our mind, and we say, well, that's that. So that's a mangled object because it's not completely recognized, but you partly identified it with something you know in yourself. And then the second layer would be, well, it's something that you're struggling to recognize completely. So there's not much identification with it at all. You can't even mangle it. So then your limitations are strong at that point because usually you'll either dismiss the thing because you have no reference point from which to deal with it. It didn't happen almost. Or you'll even actually forget about it. It'll be put into the land of slumber and it'll seem no longer relevant, or you won't even remember it the next day. So the nature of the mind's experience with things beyond the normal boundaries is quite limited in terms of where the mind operates, as far as I can see. And if the great, wonderful thing about self-inquiry that we're talking about is that you have a chance to start to notice that and to say, oh, well, this is the game. I'm being bunched up with all these different things, and this is being integrated quite falsely, but now it's given a label, and I think I know about this subject, but I don't really. So the mind is so insecure, it tries to identify everything, even when it hasn't got the gifts to understand it. So that would be the way I would view things.
Yes. Well, it's a bit like when intuition lands, there's this kind of all over felt sense of rightness, or there's a message that is felt. Yes. And that lands differently. For some people feel it in their heart, some people as an all over sensation, it just lands differently. But oftentimes what can happen is people can, when they don't trust that, they'll analyze it, or they'll talk to 10 different people about whether it's accurate or what they should do about it. And then they deconstruct it to the point where all the kind of the energy's sucked out of it, and then they just leave it be and don't do anything with it.
Very similar to what we just talked about. Yes, yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
yes. Rather
Intuition is
than,
fantastic for me. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
me too, absolutely. I mean, I just have always, always, always trusted it 100%. And, you know, when I get even of just a brief flash of an insight about something, especially if there's a call to action, then I always
Yeah.
just do. I do, even if and for the most part, I don't know, I don't have a clue, I don't know how to do it, but I just always respond. And I'll always take a step towards doing that, whatever that is I'm being called to do. And somehow it just always
That's
works out.
wonderful.
But
Yeah.
a lot of
I
people
mean, if we
just
work on
don't.
the
Yeah.
yes, no, this is, I would say, vast majority of people just don't, and then they fall into this category. What do I do with this? I don't know whether to recognize it or not. And I mean, if we take a more general view, I would say perhaps everyone on the entire planet who's alive at this moment uh, it experiences to some extent elements of intuition, but the level at which they experience it and the level at which they notice it varies. Uh, so we all have access to that inner guide. We all have access to the clues that come that are a deeper guide to who you truly are. But whether we acknowledge that or roll with it, or as you do, deeply listen to it and integrate it and live it, is another matter. And again, I put a lot of that down to the how the mind reacts to signals that are familiar to it.
Mm-hmm.
When
Yes.
you get intuition, as a sort of stranger to it, intuition, if you bear with me, if you get a little bit of intuition, well, it's not coming from your usual source where you weigh things up. It's not coming from the idea of the mind self or that I can make judgments and feelings about it. It's a deeper guidance that you just know something is right or that something is happening or that something has some importance or significance. And it's not easy for most of us to actually put our finger on that.
No.
But because it's like an elusive sense that's operating. And the curious thing is, so far as I can see, is that the majority of us actually find a way of getting on with our life, largely dismissing the message that's come to us. I mean, I know people do listen to their intuition, and I'm not denigrating that, but I'd say the majority of people that encounter intuitive clues now and then, they might notice them briefly at the time, but they generally float into the ether. Uh, and that's not for any fault of their own. It's just that whatever is in their makeup and their recognition abilities at that time is not particularly tuned into that or has some difficulty in recognizing the validity of that. And doesn't necessarily mean that they follow the clues of that, the breadcrumbs that are being given to you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not going to follow the breadcrumbs, then you may even come unstuck out because, if you're getting intuition about something, it's there for a reason, isn't it?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. Yes.
so this is I have great compassion for people who actually struggle to recognize their own intuition, because I think that's the starting point of a relationship with the higher self and the soul. Because it's like the band's playing and the music's on in the background, but there's no one really listening to it, or perhaps it's not heard very clearly. Put it that way.
Yes. Yeah, and and from when I was a really young kid, I remember just asking. I'd look up silently and look up at the sky, and I'd ask questions, or I'd ask the tree questions, or I'd be looking for signs and symbols and things. And I don't know where that came from. That certainly wasn't. I wasn't taught that, and that wasn't part of the sort of Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, but that's certainly not part of the way the Catholic tradition is taught. But I still do. I'll if there's a question about something, I'll say, oh, and I look for signs or symbols or forms in clouds, and I'll look for things on the ground, and it's very much a shamanic way of living, I think. But you can. I'm sharing this for viewers. You can engage with all of life itself outside of any sort of religiosity with respect to
Right,
having to
yeah.
go and sit in a church or whatever. And you can communicate with nature and ask for guidance and messages from nature and from a bird, or the way something lands at your feet, a feather or something, or and you
Yeah.
can really open things up that way, so that you feel connected with all of life itself, and there's no limitations, and you can receive. You don't have to sit for 3 hours in meditation. It's incredibly simple.
Yes, I'd be interested in your view about what happens with people who do get intuitive insights, but then have said to me on different occasions, well, that was wrong. It didn't happen the way I expected it to, and I had some kind of intuitive feeling about something, and it didn't work out. Now, for me, my opinion on this is that what you have is like a union between mind interpretation and elements of intuition, and the mind again maybe is distorting things or not reading the message right. Because for me, when you are really deeply seated in who you are, then basically there is no right and wrong. So you just actually understand, and it's absolutely core to your being, and there is no mistakenness in that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, perhaps the encounter with intuition can be quite a filtered thing because the mind is trying to make sense of it or perhaps interpret the story that is being given to it.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I'm with you. That I would explain it that way too. I would also add that when an intuitive prompt, let's say an intuitive prompt lands to do something, for example, the ego can then, rather than taking the simplest form of that, the simplest message and responding, in a way that is respectful of what you've been given, the ego can take charge and suddenly start building these frames and these layers around what the outcome can look like. And if, for example, if you're inspired to write a poem about something that you've felt, and maybe share it with a couple of people in your meditation group or whatever, then the ego can take charge and say, oh well, maybe I should write a book, and maybe I should do this, and maybe I should run a course, and
yeah,
and then it takes
yeah.
on a different kind of color and kind of
It's a lot of
hue.
people who have quite strong awakenings who then get caught up in the mind story and think that immediately I should become a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, of course you're being shown something profound and it's going to change your life. But where did the interpretation come that now you have to somehow convince other people of the validity of what you're doing and that they should follow perhaps what your understandings are? Where did that come from?
Yes. Yes, it's best. It's just best to keep quiet, just not say anything. Which is certainly my case. I had the awakening in 1989. I mean, I would share a few things with people at the meditation group that I belonged to, but I certainly had no interest in hanging up a shingle and becoming a teacher or whatever. And in fact, I was so surprised. It was in 2007, I think, or 2008, which is how many years after the awakening in 1989? But anyway, it's a long time. That a master yogi appeared in a dream, and she said, when are you writing the book? And I said, what am I supposed to write about? And she looked at me as if to say, come on. And but I had it wasn't part of the plan to write a book or to do any of this that I'm doing now, or any of those things, because I was busy enough with my day job.
So it came from a different source than just the ego mind, which is great,
Yeah, and in fact, I've shared this story before, but when I said, what am I supposed to write about? And she looked at me like this, and then she turned away and she walked away, and then she turned and looked over her shoulder, and she said to me, it's important to understand your own journey. And I really felt that and took that. And then when I woke up the next day, I remember lying in bed thinking, okay, I'll do what I've been asked to do, because it was like a command, really, is what it was. But I remember thinking, I'll do what I've been asked to do, but I'm not interested at all. I'm not going to do it if it comes from the ego. I'm not touching it. It's not going to happen. And then I just forgot about it. And then I think it was 2 or 3 months later, I was doing a house sit and taking care of somebody's house, looking over the ocean, looking at the beach and the palm trees, and then I started to hear the book. It was being dictated, and I just wrote it down. And really, that's how everything's been.
Yes. Well,
because
I get it. I get it. You're
yeah.
deeply intuitive and you're led by inner guidance, which is wonderful. I mean, I can't say that that always happens across the spiritual community and all the people that partake in things like that. I'm not necessarily being critical of individuals, but I think we swap one culture for another. And
Mm,
one culture in the spiritual world, the podcast world, the publication world of spiritual stories, is that I have credibility because I have a lineage. I have books out in my name, and I have some credibility on the basis of this, and that my ideas therefore have some kind of more internalized value because this is what I represent.
mhm.
Uh, whereas for me, I have the opposite of that, really. Sorry to say, I don't have a lineage known to me, although there are connections that I have in visions that I've had. But I don't have a direct lineage of teaching. I have a very intense Kundalini Shakti process that somehow has realized itself to a large extent within the body, at least. And I have very open Sahasrara and third eye vision. And I seem to be in a kind of unified consciousness. But I can't say that those things come from a source, an authorized source. All I can say to you is that it sounds a bit to me like the stuff that's contained in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and that the elements of samadhi that are described are things that have touched me, a lot of them. But also the elements of samyama, which is the ability to drop into space. I know, sorry, I'm only saying this for your viewers because I know you know what this means. The ability to absorb that which you receive and to become merged with that or part of that. To the extent that you have a kind of witnessing consciousness of what the other is, and you are it and it is you. But you have an intelligence within that operating. And also, you can even, to some degree, manifest elements of that which you are encountering. Now, these elements of that are described by Patanjali seem to accord to my construct or my experience at the moment, at least. So what I would say was, in terms of my credentials, I just identify myself with certain things that I've recognized. And it's after the experience usually. And I'm some element of a yogi in diapers. That's all I am. And what I carry with me is only the wisdom from my learnt experience and the things that have happened to me. And it isn't while I'm reading literature and interested in other people's works and stuff. Whenever you reference someone else's knowledge and stuff, it all becomes a bit clouded because it's very hard for the viewer and the reader to actually distinguish, well, what is this internalized knowledge? Is it all that, or is it also something that someone's read and understood through a tradition or something that they feel is important? Now, it's great to get guidance from other things, but I'd say the only real source is yourself, ultimately.
Yes.
I'm not discounting the value of wonderful knowledge and recognition in that knowledge when you read it, but the journey is still an internal one of self, and that all the reference points then can obviously build out of that. But at the same time, for example, when I'm reading a text, I read it in respect to that which I can recognize in myself. And if I can't recognize it, then I try not to take it on board because it's actually someone else's knowledge. Uh, so it's just a way of orientating myself. And also because Kundalini Shakti is, as you know, is such an individualized thing. It's hard to put a label on such a complex expression that can find its way in so many different ways for different. So I don't join the Kundalini Shakti worshipping groups that believes that that's it. It's almost like the idea of the self has to grow beyond all these labels, all these human articulated structures that should
Yes.
apply, or I think should apply. And the arguments then dissolve, and you realize that actually we're all just on the same journey together, hand in hand. It's just we have different ways of telling it. That's all.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's beautifully put, because that's the truth of it. You know, and I'm sure you've seen in spiritual communities as well, there can be a proclivity to study and read up, you know, every sort of book about Kundalini and different states of consciousness, and quote Nisgara Datta or Ramana Maharshi or Patanjali or whoever it is, you know all the quotes backwards. But really and truly, unless you've had your own direct experience, then it's best to be quiet. Just keep your mouth shut. And even then,
always talk from the reference point of yourself.
Yes.
And if it doesn't resonate within you, what are you talking about? No.
Exactly.
Where are you talking from if it's not from your source? So it has to come from source somehow.
Yes. Otherwise, it's just spiritual parroting, and it doesn't mean a thing.
That's also because part of our subject matter is the illusions that can develop, or the blocks that can develop in spiritual development. Well, one is the over-identification with a certain types of thinking that are associated with a certain spiritual practice, or a certain guru, or a certain way of understanding things. Now, that's all fine and good if it gets you moving on. But it seems to me that the darkish side of moving on is that often you get stuck because you're attached to one way of thinking things. So you swap one way of thinking, perhaps a previous way of thinking, to a new set of insights that seem to bring you some benefit. But then that becomes your story. You over-identify with it. And you don't realize that that's just another construct within the mind interpreting your position. For then you should be moving on and finding new horizons as well, a rolling horizon rather than a fixed horizon. And I think it's understandable, but it's very common in spiritual groups, particularly, and taught groups, that it can be quite prescriptive. There is one way of understanding things, and this is that, and that is this. They're presented as absolutes. And that doesn't allow space for the balanced, gentle, peaceful, inquiring mind to inquire of itself. It actually becomes a bit stuck at those points. So,
it's when you start hearing things like, well, Ramana says this, or Neem Crowley.
I don't mind people saying that, but why don't they say it? As for example, why don't you have the confidence to say, I believe this because I've experienced that? Yes. That's fine with me, even if it's very contrary to my opinion, because how can I challenge you if this is your authenticity?
Mm-hmm.
But when you start parroting other people, then all it means is you've identified yourself as belonging to a structure of thought that gives you some kind of extra legitimacy for what you believe, and because you feel a little bit insecure in just describing your own experience. But I understand that that's the nature of human experience. But when we still bring that into our spirituality, then we're actually, in some degrees, we're actually not that different from perhaps the formulaic versions of church expression or religious expression, which again are very human-made constructs. So a real spirituality is one that's a living, breathing fire within you that transforms and changes your world and eventually, presumably, those around you. It's not something where you just get to feel knowledgeable and to feel as, oh yes, I've achieved something. That's something else, isn't it?
Yes. The important aspect of all of this is that when you're speaking from your own direct knowing and from that place of authenticity, then there's a transmission that occurs and we feel it. We can feel this movement and the Shakti, the yogis say the Shakti, this energy. You feel it because it's coming from source itself. It's this expression that comes from that place that then has the power to awaken or to heal or to help somebody feel more at peace, or whatever it's doing. It is done, and we feel it. We feel changed by it. Whereas when it's
Yes.
secondhand and we're quoting somebody else, there's a different quality.
That's interesting because I get the same take on it as well. It's a kind of mixed bag. It's sort of like a half-baked thing. You're not quite sure, well, is this person speaking from themselves or are they speaking from something that they've integrated that's perhaps been interesting conversations with other people where they've learned something, that's fine. And also perhaps from literature that they've read that's really struck them as being important. But somehow the matrix of the presentation becomes then this mix, all presented as though it's the truth.
Yes.
But actually, it might be truths, but what it is, it's multi-source truths
Mm-hmm.
or of different qualities, and very much in the spirit of what you're saying, I really recognize when it's coming from source from someone, uh, and that the validity of that is unquestionable. I don't mind all the other elements of knowledge, but don't hide behind it. uh,
Yes.
yes, of course, it's interesting, and it'll feed into that which you are, and it enriches you. But at the same time, being knowledgeable about something is not an end in itself. I mean, there's plenty of academics out there who don't know uh, themselves at all, and they're knowledgeable about things. So being mind orientated towards the idea of what you know is quite a limitation. You know.
Yes. And it can be a hindrance as well, especially in the spiritual search. And especially if someone is pretending to speak from their own direct knowing and they're just
Yes.
quoting from a spiritual teacher. It's not
Yes.
it's not a good situation at all. It's a hindrance. It's much
There's
better
one
to say
example.
you don't
Yes.
know.
Yes. I mean, before I had my awakening, I did have various experiences. And one of them was in the early hours of the morning. I was visited by my neighbor, who was a very famous lady. I don't mind mentioning her name now because she's passed away, Margaret Simey, Dame Margaret Simey. And I was the editor of her last book, and she'd fired a lot of her editors previously. So possibly I was in line to be fired as well. But bless her, she wasn't doing very well, and she was in hospital. And one morning, in a dream, lucid dream, she visited me, and she was in the university area, and she ushered me in because I was a university teacher at the time. She ushered me into this sort of quadrangle area in the open landscaped area of the university, the sort of garden area, and there was she sort of challenged me. She basically said, you know, she got me into this space which was ticker taped off so no one else could enter. And she said, I want you to look around you and tell me the most beautiful thing that you can see. Uh, and I had a look and I could see lots of banks of carefully planted lovely red roses and stuff like that, because that was the raised beds that they had in the area. Uh, and then I saw in between the roses there was it was a weed, but it had this most beautiful flower to it. I said, that's the most beautiful thing. And then she sort of manifested a bucket and a spade. And she said, right, go and dig it up. So I went and dug up this beautiful thing, put it in a pot to keep it, and she made sure that I kept it. And then she disappeared from the scene. Her mission accomplished in helping me to find the most beautiful thing. And that morning when she visited me, she must have been visiting a few people because she passed away that morning. Uh,
Wow.
so she gave a gift to me. And the gift was to understand the unorthodox, to look for the unorthodox, to operate in the cracks of the pavement, to actually understand that the people that are parading their knowledge as though they understand all things about all things, because a university actually means all things, doesn't it?
Yes.
University. They actually can be quite limited in their subject matter, and they miss the big issues whilst drilling down into what they feel is really important. So there are lots of spaces to operate, and most people, bless them, they don't necessarily always gravitate to the most beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite a lesson to me to operate that way, to not be so conditioned by perhaps others' expectations of what's important, and how to perhaps to orientate yourself and to look at such things.
Yes, to see anew, to see with fresh eyes, and to trust your own seeing as well, right? And your own feeling.
Well, I mean, the dream was pretty vivid, so I got it straight away.
Yes. Well, I'm just seeing the time, and we've been on for quite a while. So maybe I think for this episode, it'd be good to end things here. But before we close off, do you want to just kind of give viewers an idea about how they can find you if they want help, discussing or sharing anything to do with Kundalini Awakenings, or, whatever it is you would like to help or share with
well,
people?
I mean, perhaps in the future I'll have a website or something. But I mean, the main thing I use to actually it's like a notebook. I post quite a lot on my Facebook site for David Bingham, and some reflections. Though it's really like a notebook. But I mean, people are welcome through that to friend up or contact me on Messenger. But what I would point out, just to save another David Bingham, who's a non-dual teacher, please make sure you get the right David Bingham, because his orientation is very interesting, but he comes at it from quite a different angle.
Okay, so they can find you on Facebook primarily.
Yeah, David Bingham. It's got a picture of a Greek background with a blue roofed church, and my ugly mug on the front as well. And it's a picture very close to where I live now in Crete. So it's something that touches my heart.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, David, I'd love to invite you back so that we can have a deeper conversation and dive in maybe, more. Sometime in the future. We can talk about that.
To do so when it suits you. Yes.
That'd be great. Great.
And I'm happy to answer anyone's questions that might arise from the podcast as well. That's great.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been really, really great. I've loved every minute. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As always, I really appreciate you spending time with me today and with my guest today. It's great. As David said, if you have questions, feel free to ask them below, and either one of us will get back to you as soon as we can. If you haven't subscribed, you know what to do. And in the meantime, take it easy, be well, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.